What's going on, everyone? My name is Colin. I'm here from the Music City Accelerator course, and today I wanted to make our lesson completely about compression. When I first started producing, I thought it was impossible to hear. Like, I could not tell a compressed signal from another, and I think I found a way to really point out that exact compressed signal and show it to you guys in a way where you can start training your ear to learn. But there's also a lot more nuances to compression, more so than just playing with the amplitude of a sound. There's also a lot of tone that can be derived from compression. And so today I'm going to show you exactly what to be looking for, when to use certain types of compression, and how to hear compression, and maybe to also hear when a sound might need compression and when it might be helpful to have it. So let's jump right in. So the first thing I want to tackle is what compression looks like visually before we listen to it audio-wise. This makes it way more easy to understand going into it and kind of helps us pick out the certain details that we want to hear. You can see we have this kind of example sound here, strong transient, a little bit of bell shape in the amplitude to the body, and then we've kind of got a sound with a transient and a longer tail right after. Don't know what the sound would be. Maybe this is a guitar pluck note. I don't know. I'm not quite sure. Maybe a little drum, a little drum action or something of the sort. But regardless of what the sound is supposed to be, you can see that we're not doing any compression until we bring down the threshold. And then only the amplitude that is louder or above our set threshold point is going to be what is brought down in volume. And the decider and how much volume we bring that down is actually going to be our ratio amount. So you can see as I increase the ratio amount on the left here, we bring the volume down closer and closer to what our threshold would be. Generally, if we had a 4 dB signal and we had a ratio of 4, we would bring that dB amount down to 1 dB. Compressors are also a little bit more nuanced, more so than just threshold or ratio. We also get attack and release functions with every compressor. And so looking at the attack first, you can see that as I increase our attack slider on the left here, we're actually giving back our transient information closer to what it was before the compressed signal. And what the attack is actually doing is it controls how fast the compressor reacts after the signal crosses the threshold. So a fast attack will generally catch transients and not let that through, give them the compression that we would almost usually expect. What a higher attack will do is actually let transient type amplitudes through. Any longer, more sustainy type parts of the sound will get more compression. This is usually pretty strong on drums because we can leave transients transparent and unaffected by the compression, but the body of the drums to be a little bit more controlled. Release on the inverse actually controls how quickly the compressor stops compressing after the signal drops back below the threshold. Fast release will cause a little bit more energy and some more pumping, while a slow release is smoother, more controlled compression amounts. And let's say we decide to compress our signal something like this. We're actually given a makeup or a post-gain effect, usually in most compressors, in which we can actually go and match about the same amplitude or loudness of our signal before or after, or just kind of choose the pocket that we want it to be in without having to throw a utility after our compressor. So now you can see right here, if I match the gain to be about what it was, the tails or the quietest parts of our sound are actually brought up to be a little bit louder, while our loudest parts are brought down a bit to match kind of more the quieter levels. By compressing our sound like this, you can see that a lot of the lower level information gets way more detail and matches more of the detail that we would have in our louder, higher amplitude information in the sound. Okay, so now that we understand how compression works, I want to show you guys what to listen for in compression. The best way to do this, in my opinion, is to actually get a utility and to make a null test unit or a phase cancellation unit. Basically, what we're going to do is put our utility in a group. We're going to duplicate that utility, and then we're going to flip the phases of one of them. So no matter what audio that we put through this, currently you can see I'm playing audio, it completely phases itself out back to perfect silence. But now I'm able to throw our compressor into either one of these chains, turn on the compressor, and then any gain reduction we do is actually going to be the change between these two utilities, and it's going to be what we subtract from the sound instead of trying to listen to the sum of the compression after the subtraction. So let's bring our threshold down here. And now you can see that we're actually catching the peaks of this drum loop. This is exactly the information which we're going to be cutting from the sound once we take the compressor out of this phase cancellation rack. If I go ahead and bring our ratio amount down closer to 1:1, you'll see that the compression effect actually goes away. and is completely transparent when we're back to 1:1. This makes sense because a 1:1 ratio wouldn't be applying any compression. But the higher amount of ratio that I go to, the more compression and the more gain reduction that we're going to be applying. We can also hear exactly how our attack and release affects the sound as well. Watch how the transients disappear when I increase our attack. Hear how the rest of our sound will also come in when I bring up the release. Bringing up the release makes the compression a lot less surgical, and honestly to me can really dial in the groove of your compression. So now I'm going to create a compressor which really targets the transients, and I want you to listen to the before and after of our signal here. With compression and without. So you can see that we actually take a little bit of life out of our sound, especially by attacking those transients. We're bringing all that amplitude information a lot closer to each other. I think there's a time and place for compression like this, but maybe in this instance, it's better to bring up the attack on our compression to let those transients breathe a little bit more. Although super subtle, this is one of those tricks that can really bring a lot of presence and life to your sound just by using one compressor. I would also like to note that this compressor aims to be as transparent as possible. We're not trying to add any tone or analog warmth like we would with maybe some physically modeled compressors, which is a compressor that we're going to get into next. So for this one, I set up an example where we've got a sine wave that's playing at C, which is all the way down to about 33, 34 hertz. And if I go ahead and bring the threshold on this compressor all the way down, see that we're actually given odd series harmonics to the sound. If I go ahead and look at the next harmonic, we're at about 99 hertz, which is going to be 3x what our fundamental was. And this is due to the nature of clipping more than the compressor. We're driving the sound so loud that it has no option but to become a square wave versus a perfect sine. And this is the minimum amount of distortion that we can get out of this compressor by driving it this hard. Again, this compressor is just aiming to be as linear as possible, and this is distortion that would happen with or without this compressor. It's really just the signal that's clipping and becoming a square wave, which is why we're getting those odd series harmonics. Now let's move on to the next compressor in our list. The next one is going to be glue compressor. This is actually an analog modeled compressor based off the SSL mixing bus. If I put the glue compressor in the phase rack, what you're going to hear is kind of a more natural, less robotic response from the gain reduction. Already sounds a lot like our original signal. And the reason being is that this compressor aims to be a lot more lush and a lot more gentle, not something that's supposed to be as surgical as the regular compressor. It's not trying to be this perfect digital compressor, it's really aiming to be warm, analog, vintage feel. That being said, it's not a compressor that's trying to add lots of tone either, like saturation. I'm going to set up these two compressors with the exact same values, and I'll let you guys hear the difference between the two of them through the phase cancellation rack. I've set up both compressors to be as close to each other as possible based off the values of the attack, release, ratio, threshold, zero makeup on either of them, and let's hear how each one reacts a little bit differently. We'll start with compressor. And now glue compressor. And I'll compare one more time, but with a lower threshold on each of the compressors. Describing the nuance of each compressor, I feel like words really elude, but to even a slightly trained ear, I feel like you would be able to hear a little bit of the tone change, a little bit more of the natural feel that a glue compressor might have versus the regular compressor. And you also might think that the regular compressor is a little bit too surgical or a little bit too precise. The glue compressor feels natural and real to me, while the regular compressor is very surgical. Now I'm going to show you an example of just the gain reduction that a glue compressor would be doing, and then I want you to listen to the glue compressor on its own, summed after the gain subtraction, and try and pay attention and really hear a difference this time. So that would be the information that we're cutting out of the summed signal. And now let's hear that signal by itself by turning on and off the glue compressor. I'm also going to try and match the gain using the makeup knob so that we can hear about the same loudness level from each compressed and uncompressed version. I would say the version that goes through glue compressor has a lot more grit, a lot more body, has a lot more attitude. And this is thanks to a much more natural algorithm, but also the built-in saturation and warmth that glue compressor introduces. Let me explain that real quick. So if I once again go ahead and drive our compressor with a sine wave, you'll see that we're actually getting even and odd series harmonics. So we've got our odd series really standing out. This is going to be our 33, our 99 like we saw before, but we're also going to get the even harmonics like the 66 or up here to the 130-ish range. These harmonics really round out the response from our compressor, and it doesn't give us these sharp edges like we would get with the regular compressor. Instead, it gives us round, more natural compression responses, which really contribute to the tone and texture of this compressor, which is what I keep referring back to. Hopefully these examples really clear up exactly how compressors work, and you can hear the nuances between the two. What's important is to understand how to use either of them. So if you've got a group of sounds that you really want to pull together and almost try and make them feel like they're in the same room and really talk to each other, this is a situation for glue compressor. The subtle saturation and the really natural feel of the compression algorithm in glue compressor is going to do a better job at tying things together. That's why it's called glue compressor. It wants you to take a group of many sounds and pull them together and glue them together. In the instance of processing a vocal and wanting to keep it maybe as dry or transparent as possible, this is where you'd want to use your regular compressor. It's if you're doing surgical work and you're trying to treat the sound as little as possible while catching things such as transients or increasing the body in a way that's as transparent as possible. And just a side note here, you're able to do something which is generally known as New York compression, where you actually dial back the dry wet of your compressor. It's kind of nice to hit the transients with your compressor when using this method because it will kind of put those transients in a very compact and controlled room with the rest of your body and tail of your sound, but you can reintroduce those transients by pulling back the dry wet a little bit. This way we're getting the most dynamic signal, but also the signal that is extremely flat and controlled and sausaged out in a way. And it can just be another flavor of compression beyond just choosing between the regular compressor or glue compressor. Last compressor I want to address is Multiband Dynamics. This is going to be 3 of our extremely transparent compressors, but they're going to be for unique bands within our sound. So low band, mid band, high band. What's unfortunate is that because we have a little bit of crossover between the high and mid and the mid and the low bands, we actually get phasing, which is really accentuated by our phase inversion rack. So normally when this would be completely silent when I play, especially if all of our bands are 1-to-1 ratio, we're actually hearing that phase crossover playing from this rack. Something to consider while you're compressing with this version. And there's other compressors that are linear phase between each of the bands, but when it comes to what's built into Ableton, this is the best we have to work with. You'll see that each of these bands we're given controls with these little bars, and we've got a below and above value that we can play with, each with their own ratios as well. If I drag our bar to the left all the way to the right and then play with this ratio, you'll see that we're actually doing expansion or making all the low sounds louder. The bars on the right act as a ceiling, and so we can bring these down and then really pull up the ratio on these. and this will really control the loudness. As well as for each of these compressors, we actually get attack and release times for each of them as well. And then final output levels for each of these compressors as well. We're also able to control the time of every single compressor globally. A fantastic use for this compressor is actually to add shine to the high end of certain sounds, such as your vocals. An EQ shelf could be a good idea for adding high end. It's going to add volume to the loud information as well as the quiet information, and maybe it's not as nuanced as what we might be going for. And so we can do the exact move with the multiband compressor like I was showing you, where we can increase this bottom band and do expansion.
Fool me once, fool me twice, higher depths of paradise, now you never.
And now that low level information is getting a lot more love with this method.
Fool me once.
And just like we did with glue compressor before, we can apply New York compression by bringing down the amount with our multiband dynamics. I can also really hear a lot of mids in this sound as well, so maybe I'm going to apply a little bit of a ceiling and just increase the compression amount here.
Fool me once, fool me twice, higher depths of paradise, now you know.
I don't really have a need for the low band, so I just want to make sure I tackle those lower frequencies as well, so I'm going to turn the low band off. Now we really brighten up this vocal, thinned it out a little bit, and this might be something that's more applicable for the mix that we're shooting for. So that pretty much concludes all my thoughts about compression. Let me know if you find this useful, especially if you're a newer producer. And even for more experienced producers, this can all be good stuff to brush up on as you continue to produce. If you're interested in continued education, check out our Music City Accelerator program and follow us for more Ableton tips like this.